Good evening.
Hello.
My name is Kenneth. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm super excited to be with you this evening for our next to last reading, if you can believe it, in 2022, of Poetry at the Point. I'm going to bring you the poetry of Katerina Katherine, and Jennifer Goldring tonight. I'm super excited about all these poets. Before we get started, a few quick announcements, some of the usual, but before some of the usual, I just think it's worth, I don't want us to do anything or have to say anything about it, but I just want to acknowledge the gun violence that happened yesterday in this community, because we're all thinking about it, we're all feeling our ways through it. St. Louis Poetry Center has deep connections to that school. Many of us in the audience do too. My son was a mile away at another St. Louis public school, so I'm not going to say anything about thoughts and prayers because I think we need to move past that. So I will just say vote, 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 vote. So acknowledged. And changing gears pretty dramatically, I'm looking for poets for 2023 for Poetry at the Point. I only have probably 2 or 3 so far signed up. So if you are one of those poets or you know one of those poets, please, please, please let them know. You can reach out to anybody at the Poetry Center. My email address is poetry.point@stlouispoetrycenter.org. So please do spread the word because we are looking for a few good poets for next year. Actually, 11 times 3. Good poets. Thanks for doing your best to stay safe. If you want to grab a mask, though those are optional now, you can grab one of those over by the door. COVID season might be upon us again, but flu season, I can tell you for working at a healthcare system, is absolutely upon us. So thanks for keeping everybody else safe if that's something that you want to take care of with a mask up front. Usual shout outs to the members of the St. Louis Poetry Center. You can become a member at our website. Pretty please do that. Shout out to the Missouri Arts Council. They support us every year with our programming like this one. And huge shout out to the Focal Point for continuing to host us, even keeping the lights on through our kind of virtual era now that we're back to both doing it in a hybrid fashion. Quick housekeeping, for those of you who are actually in the Focal Point, restrooms are out the door to the left. Casa Maya next door will allow you to bring glassware in here if you want to. Just pretty please take it back to them when you're done. And we do have some books for sale, I know especially from Katerina in the back, so pretty please go see her after the reading is over and purchase some poetry. If you are watching this in real time on the Facebooks or other internet spaces, we're glad you're here too. Pretty please comment, pretty please share the link, interact with it, and post any questions you have for the poets. If we have time at the end, usually we don't, but sometimes we do. I'll ask the poets to come up and we'll have some informal conversation to close out the hour. If you're viewing this after October 25th, we're still glad you're here. Still comment, still share. We always want to build support for this reading series and for our poets too. So, enough with the announcements, and now on to the poetry. Our first poet this evening is Katerina Katherine, a 2020 and 2019 Pushcart Prize nominee. Her stories have been published in the New York Times, the Huffington Post, and Folks. Her poetry has been published in Cathexis Northwest, The Aesthetic Apostle, Into the Void, Black Napkin, and Waxing and Waning. That one's my favorite. Her first book of poetry, Changing the Lines, was released in August 2017. From 2000 to 2003, she served as the Poet Laureate of Sunland Tuyunga. She has a BA in English, International Studies, and Creative Writing from St. Louis University, and a Master of Arts in Law and Diplomacy from the Fletcher School at Tufts University. Her latest book, Surviving Home, was released in 2021. This is Katerina's next to last stop, I think she told me, on her current tour, and she's going to do the last one in LA before she collapses on the floor. So we're glad to have her here before she collapses on the floor. Please welcome Katerina to the stage.
Thank you, Kenneth, and thank you everyone at Focal Point for having me. These are usually shorter than I am, so I'm trying to put it up a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to start with a poem from my book, Changing the Lines. I think I have one left. I wrote this while I was attending St. Louis University, except for this one poem that I'm going to share now. after Ferguson. If I sit and write a poem about the injustice of it all, what would it change really? If I tried hard enough, people would probably like it on Facebook and call it insightful. I'm sure if I worked a little harder, maybe revised it once or twice, maybe someone would be moved to tears. But what would that change? Poems were written in Watts, and all we have are the towers and stories from my mother who said, "This place was beautiful once." We wrote poems for Rodney King and Reginald Denny, and the only thing that changed in South Central was the name. I don't even know what to call it anymore, and I was born there. We write poems when Emmett Till dies. We write poems when Trayvon Martin dies. Jordan Davis dies, and we write poems. Michael Brown dies, and we write poems. White men kill black men. Black men kill black men. By shooting, by lynching, by dragging, and we write poems. Black men die, and we write poems. Black men die, and we write poems. Black men die, and we write poems. These lines don't change. So this is from my book, Surviving Home. I wrote it when I was in a very dark place, and so a lot of the poems are pretty dark. But here we go. I just get into it. Just do it. My story is not one revealed with chapter and verse. It is expressed in blood and bone. It is fingernails thrust into back muscles. It is razor blades pressed against flesh. It is told by how the shark swims through the ocean below a school of tuna, and it is not the shark story. It is the school of tuna searching along the vast, dark, but sunlight speckled ocean, while knowing they have everywhere and nowhere in the world to flee. It is the brown bear pulling honey from the honeycomb in order to teach her cubs to survive on their own. But it's not the brown bear's story. It belongs to the cubs who wander the forest without her after she sacrificed her life to a boar grizzly to protect them. It is told through hot cylinders of pain that sear experience into the skin. It is told in front of the sharp bayonet that sprays blood-red existence into the multicolored palette of the universe. It may sit silent and still on these black and white pages, but it exists in every tremble of my leathered hand, and it is smeared in every tear-stained scream that flows through my quavering pen. I felt my brother's wrists bound around a phone pole by handcuffs in the dark desert night. I heard his screams and the whips crack like thunder following lightning. He was 13, I think. I was 15, maybe. That time sits in a cloud without minutes. I just remember twitching as if each crack were against my back. But they were not. I'm just a witness. I hover through storms and report the heat index of memories. That night, the sky was crimson. The moon shined like a spotlight against atrocities. The whip stopped when the screams stopped. Then my father left him standing and bound to the pole for the rest of the night. My pain is sculpted into art for you to consume. Here is my pain. Gunshots echoing into the night, bullets whizzing past me as I flee across abandoned lots, heroin hidden behind the pink bow in my panties. Consume it. Here is my pain. Switch mark whoopings, the smell of PCP, a black man dead in a Texas creek. Consume it. This is my pain. my mother beaten black by my father beaten blue by police over my voice. Consume it. This is my pain. My furniture pushed past the sidewalk while LA marshals watched and my friends stared. Consume it. This is my pain. Getting stopped by police for mumbling reasons, getting searched without cause, being followed in fear. Consume it. This is my pain. Watching my black mother die while watching white women live with the same thing. Seeing my tiny baby thrive among fat white babies. Consume it. This is my pain. Watching black babies die. Consume it. This is my pain. Watching black boys die. Consume it. This is my pain. Watching black men die. Consume it. Discuss it. Write it. Allow it to give you verbal diarrhea on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. Give it a Black Lives Matter hashtag and then do absolutely nothing. This next one is called Aunt May. She cries at the stereo as if the notes can take her to heaven, as if it could take her to heaven on the notes of ZZ Hill's Down Home Blues, every other record or two. Uncle Eljo, that no good son of a bitch, held her heart in a vice. Then he died, relegating him to the beloved angel he never was, fleeing into mangled clouds on shredded wings made of brambles, as if Texas soil were fertile. Hill's throat pulls notes, his voice trickling crude into Aunt May's Los Angeles living room. ZZ Hill is redemption coded in Texas blood. L and ZZ are one. Their crooning calls to her before the song ends and she restarts. The voices harmonize mercurial, chaotic as oil gushers, spilling into the fields of Canaan. In the promised land, there are no Negro spirituals, no blues, no white man's hand smiting the black man's face, but there is always a burden for the black woman. She knows this song well, and she sings it again. Down home blues, down home blues, every other record or two. Sojourner. Truth is where I found you, and the cusp high over ultraviolet waves between your time as a slave and mine fighting off the results of bondage. You were a woman who accepted no excuse for lack of rights for our mothers and daughters, demanded more for those who followed. I am a woman who accepts that most white men are fixed on one idea as to how the world should be, and it is on me to change their minds through words or actions, but never through guns or swords. White bonnet strapped around my head as I pushed away racial insults and profanity. You never forget to say who a woman could be, what a black woman could do when we eschewed weakness and misogyny. No one helped you. You just carved a trail. No one helps me either. That's what I learned it means to be a black woman, to be strong, to plow, to plant, to raise barns. That's what you did. I do that metaphorically. Now, I raise children, plow through journals with my pen. I always remember to never pin my tongue for fear of others' thoughts. This is the way you walked. I try to get my half measure full, but I think it is a little less difficult for me as it was for you. Thank you for the quarter you earned. It took us a long way, but today the world is still turned upside down and we're working hand by hand to flip it right side up. waves, wrapped in dark skin, absorbed by tissue and bone. The notes I take serve as branded relics of my tribulations. Like a mural painted on quicksand, the mind cannot fix recollection. When there is no palette with oils to mix, when God recalls the art I choose to display without praise, the whips lash as steel brush strokes across wrought iron flesh from fire, learned from my parents, in turn from their mamas and daddies, handed down from the plantation, what will I say? This is my art, handed down by God's flood. His pestilence, the bruises were his marks upon Cain, the blood, the pain upon Eve. I will not ask forgiveness for denying him, just as he will not ask for mine. This will be my last one. Yet another attempt at self-immolation. Have you decided to move backward or forward today? You ask without encouraging consonants. A young disinterested mouse appears approximately 2 seconds later and dawdles along the New York Times resting at my feet. We make eye contact and it continues across the dark wood floor to the kitchen island and climbs up the side like an ebony spider. You did not notice the direction of my eyes or the cake wrapper on the counter crinkle as the mouse nibbles through. What is it with you? You ask. Why can't you just be happy? Why can't you just suck it up? The least attentive people find happiness. Like the first potato chip, which was made by mistake. Can you imagine what it felt like to taste the first potato chip? Every time I open a bag of Lay's or a can of Pringles, I think, you're a mistake. Truly adenosine on my thighs. The abyss is not at one with the conscience. It always avoids corruption. None of these trivialities separate the cake. What are you doing? You ask as I pick up the knife. Slicing the cake, I respond. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katerina. Thank you for that powerful work that just set the tone for honesty this evening. I'm very, very grateful for you. Our second reader this evening is Catherine Mitchell, whose poems and essays appear in Two River View, the Southern Review, and the Louisville Review. Louisville, it's 2 syllables, by the way. The Southern Review nominated her poetry for Best New Poets. Catherine holds an MFA in creative writing from the University of Missouri here in St. Louis. She is an Alexander Technique teacher and teaches movement for writers' workshops across the country. Please welcome Catherine.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction and for everybody coming. Since the last time I read here at Poetry in the Point, we have lost 2 wonderful poetry teachers and poets, Jonathan Smith and Marianne Grand Dupree Kelly. Both of these people helped me so much with my poetry, so I just want to read a little set of 3 poems that they helped me with. They had this amazing ability to really grasp the gestalt of your poem. I mean, they knew their P's and Q's, but I think maybe it was their humanity and compassion that they brought to workshops that just really enabled them to give feedback that was really multifaceted and rich. And it's just something to aspire to, and that I think everybody needs right now, because all of that's mixed together. So, and I guess it goes without saying that the shortcomings of these poems aren't all mine. Oh, and the first poem is based on an opera, the Dialogues of the Carmelites, and that opera is based on the Carmelite nuns who refused to renounce their vocation during the French Revolution. Poulenc asks that his opera be sung in the language of the audience. The conductor stopped speaking to his wife years ago. They have breakfast in the sunroom, loosen small segments of grapefruit, dress from their walk-in closets. He selects a favorite tuxedo. Standing waist deep in the orchestra pit, the conductor opens and closes his hands. A woman is seated so far stage right she can see him in his pocket of yellow light. The woman doesn't know the man seated on her left. His hands are smooth and quiet, like sparrows resting on his trousers. It is a true story. Before being led to slaughter, 16 nuns are stripped of their habits. The first is taken away, then the sound of the guillotine falling. The woman can hear the conductor breathing. He pulls the lush carpet of notes into his body. Eyes closed, his head falls back. Without turning, the unknown man on her left brushes her bare leg with the back of his hand, a gloss on the inside of her knee. Her husband is in the car napping, too tired, too bored to come back in after intermission. One by one, the nuns exit the stage, a weighted blade, light as a whisper as it rushes, then certain, caught. The woman starts to cry. Lines of soldiers stand braced, their shadows thrown against the wall. She knew the story before she came. She sent a photo of herself to her husband, the camera balanced on the table. The self-timer went off while she was adjusting her shoe, smiling. She signed it only, your wife. The curtain call is long and persistent. Each layer of the cast moves forward, pale and unmasked, to bow. No one knows when it will come, the surge of applause. Whose dying or singing will cause the audience to call out, to stand. The charming brother, Madame Lidouin, certainly Blanche de la Force, who could have escaped. They raise their joined arms and recede as though pulled backward. The flocking rows of human hands beating like wings. Lure. You plant asparagus as though we will sit at the table tonight, feet in the grass, an anchor of moon over the pasture, cars just visible under the oak. The back door opens with the weight of light, a wedge that mimics the refrigerator door opened in the middle of the night. We stay outside with the rub of heat, a handing of cold plates, glasses of wine, our fingers print in condensation. Guacamole filled with cilantro makes a path on the tongue for words floating over the table like a cloth that hasn't landed. I describe a sculpture I saw of heaven and hell, a two-sided cabinet. The sky blue side holds shelves of swimmers, cake, picnics, and convertibles. The red side fills with burning screens, thumb-sized figures suspended upside down, falling naked and sexless. Lights from the house make aquarium windows. One holds a bar of soap, an empty glass for rinsing. the next a floral bedspread over a rolled dough of pillows. You describe the 3 phases of asparagus. The dog runs to the water bowl just filled. The tree borers. The clearing with its soft grass opens your mouth. You tell me about your son's death. It happened the morning of his high school graduation. When he didn't come down, you went upstairs to wake him, the household in an upbeat mood. The 2 older girls, your stepdaughters, had been easy. But this child, the one you'd known from the beginning, whose thin body was honed from defiance, you'd kept him close. Put a pool table in the basement for the boy and his friends. Sat upstairs with the TV off, reading by a single lamp, an owl, listening. Even as you followed the 911 operator's instructions, you knew. Even as you watched your own hands press on your son's chest, heard yourself counting. Tell me, you say. Could it be that all the pain in my family condensed into this boy, potent as heroin? That everything we survived lingered in the airless corners of the house, waiting for this child? You speak in the language of soft grass, our voices, our little group of words. You dream of carrying your son to lay him in the ground, counting shovels of dirt, of the boy standing in front of the summer sun, invisible. The oaks are witnesses, the hard vest of their bark cracked open, leafless limbs waiting to fall. Tree borers have traveled across the country, not enough frost to hold them back. You and your son enter the woods. Oaks throw the long forks of their shadows on the path. Your shadows walk side by side. The familiar shape of his short cowlicked hair and narrow shoulders. Your thicker shape slopes along. You will drag the dead limbs out of the woods, load them onto the truck. You'll stand them on end, split each one open with an axe, stack them neatly for firewood. So if Elon Musk continues with his space program, this next poem, I may have to edit it. Man on the Moon, January 16th, 2017. The last man to walk on the moon dies. He is 82. On the same day, an elephant rescues 3 men stranded by a flood. He swims across the rushing river, carrying them on his back to safety. Humans have 60,000 miles of blood vessels inside their bodies, long enough to circle the world twice. Today I get lost walking home from work. It starts with that warm pull from passing the familiar white brick house at the top of the hill. I can see in the lit windows, smell dinner being cooked. As I start to descend the hill, the power goes off with a snap. The line of streetlights seems to drop like a rope. I'm careful with my footing as the darkness makes the incline feel steeper, the air cooler. Houses become lifeless ships, black against a brown-black sky. A brown-black topography of roads, sidewalks, yards. This doppelganger of my neighborhood has been waiting below the surface. The energy efficiency of the human heart provides just enough oxygen, even when stressed. In December 1972, astronauts performed the bunny hop on the moon's surface while singing. The nation watches, feels the loosening of gravity, sees their own planet through the astronaut's eyes. So I have one more poem. This is a brand new poem. We're still in our honeymoon phase. No one's tried to change anyone. No one has left their dirty socks on the bathroom floor yet. A dream about our world. In the tigeresque dusk, many friendly shapes clamor along. What do you care how this looks? It's our fertile hands. Precious and heavy, it must be said, before our wicked, ravenous loves left. Short lives abruptly ended, a half-life, sweet for time. Carbon-14 breaks down, hoping to be excavated, hoping to be pressed between the pages of a book. The flocks return, shoulder to shoulder, precious and heavy shapes. Belongings rust in the corners. We lean out over the balcony, a scrap of light in the horizon. In the half-moon's calm, we swim in parallel lines, handfuls of water, mouthfuls of air. So many friendly shapes, dry their skin. Who cares how it looks? We claim our half-lives, clamor along. This is our hour. Stay.
All right. Thank you very much, Captain. Our last reader for the evening is Jennifer Goldring, a poet based in St. Louis, Missouri. On her days off, she's likely playing with clay, taking photos, hanging with her teenagers, or writing poems. She is the managing editor for December magazine. Her award-winning poetry has appeared in various publications, and her photography and other work can be found at jennifergoldring.com and her soon-to-be revamped Etsy store, I would imagine. Please welcome Jennifer to the stage.
Thanks so much for having me, and thanks to the Poetry Center as always. You guys are fantastic, and thank you to the other readers. They were beautiful, powerful work. I mean, all. So I am just going to kind of dive in. I'm getting older, and I don't have to wear these stupid glasses. I felt like as I was pulling poems to read tonight, I had kind of a theme that arrived, which was this idea of correspondence and then also seasons. I've been, thinking a lot about the seasons, I guess. So I'm just going to start reading, and maybe you'll see those kinds of things emerge. A break from the fast. As if not talking was moving on, as if love just ends, as if my heart was an object I could pull out of my chest, as if we were separate from me, as if night didn't come anyway, all the full moons lost in the clouds, as if the wishing well didn't turn rancid, I threw in coins and drank from it too, as if starving myself ever accomplished anything, as if rain didn't fall for days and flood the streets, as if coming out of the shade of the forest wouldn't blind me, as if that first meal wasn't the most delicious, as if I didn't gorge on you like the waxwings on berries after a frost, as if I didn't love all that drunk blindness, as if we don't hum at higher frequencies, as if your knowing this all changes a thing, as if I could stop it, the world and its spinning. So I have a friend who I have been doing a correspondence of poems with. She's here. So we kind of write these poems back and forth to each other in letter form, and then I also kind of do an homage where I write a letter in poem form to kind of pay tribute to the people I love. So I'm going to read a few of those. Late autumn hike at St. Joe State Park. It's scary to think we were nearly in the path of that tornado. It carved its way through Reynolds County. That we left when we did was either luck or grace. The lady at the gift shop said a Category 3 storm was coming. And 2 hours later, it came in the form of a funnel cloud and flying debris. And here I was buying a book about butterflies of Missouri and laughing that I don't need another book. It's just that I still find comfort in books just as I did as a child, knowing there is either escape or knowledge provides solace. And I've been reading more lately anyway, trying to be more present and less caught up in the flash, click, bang of the online world. I'm not fretting about who's thinking about me or if anyone is at all. I feel a movement towards alone, a movement towards the water as I always have. I am a waywardness, as if I have no control where the wind will push me when it's time, like how the wind furies itself into funnels and then just somehow disappears, or how the wind pushes a butterfly on and on and on. House of Light. The older I get, the more afraid I am of electricity. Also, the more fascinated I am by it. I want to know how the current surges through the wires or arcs from the telephone line to the ground. I watch lightning with a strange curiosity. It once struck the chimney on my house and its burnt scent permeated. Now I don't want to go inside. There is too much scorched memory in the walls, and each room is a fragment of who I was or am. I'd rather be outside. I'd rather be near the water. I'd rather not know certain things. Heraclitus said, "No man steps in the same river twice." That river runs by my house. My feet are always in it. I see your house of light and the trail of dew-filled spiderwebs along the way the light catches in each drop and is held in your doorway. I want to come in. Yes, I am on my way, but my journey has left me weary. You say recovery, and I say I don't know if that exists. I want to believe. I want to be showered by the same light, sparks flying and falling all around me. I too want to be split open. Do you hear that guttural churn in my vocal cords? A voice not quite my own says I am afraid. Another says I am not afraid. All of me says, today I know I will make it. Dear Jay, short for Julie. I don't know why that's important. Dear Jay, a Stellar's jay looks for trinkets. The fish crow finds a mollusk, and some are fed, some are hungry from searching. Your nest hollow heart grasps for love. The truth is, your heart is full, but your mind has lost the notion of full. Your mind desires the romance novel ending, the books you read voraciously cover to cover. We want what we cannot have, the fantasy. I say this to remind you of a person you knew as yourself a short time ago. Your light shine smile, your unrestrained laughter, your curiosity for all the world around you is lost. And like the robin tossing leaves out of its way in search of nest materials, I know you too will find exactly what you need. Instructions for recording bird vocalization for my Aunt Laura. Get out. Get outside of your house, your body, your head. Drive fast through the city to reach the grace of your uncertainty. Walk a few feet or acres or miles, whatever you need to get across or over or through your grief. Move so far and fast you don't recognize your surroundings, yourself, your lover, your friends, not even the shape of the word family in your mouth. Be still, as a tree, as a mountain, as a whisper. But breathe in that way you do after a long night's restless sleep, that hypnagogic river of repetition where you think you hear her voice and you feel like you're falling and you jolt awake over and over. Listen. Soon you'll hear the creek, the river, the wind, and how they tell you where you can find the spotted towhee, the bunting, the lark, and wait. Wait for your heartbeat to slow. Wait for your feet to grow moss and lichens. Wait for the fissure in your heart to split you through. Turn on your recording device. Let it spin as it receives the sound of blood circulating through your body, the anger leaving your fingers, the memory of the phone call reporting her suicide. Don't press pause. Be patient. Be patient for your body to become forest and loam and forgiveness. Let one shaft of sun hit your left eye. Feel the warmth on your face. Remember the time that the two of you road tripped to Flagstaff singing free as birds. And if you see something flying, it's too late. You've already missed it. Stop the recording. Thoughts on early spring. If I only wake to birdsong every morning, sorry, I read a lot about birds apparently. If I only wake to birdsong every morning, my otherwise empty bed, soda light cache polished smooth, a creek bed find last fall, a bouquet of peonies still ant infested, 6 ways to Sunday, your heart literally stopped, like all the cars at the train crossing, and started again minutes later. It has been the strangest spring yet, all the things we've lost. Still, the pine siskins delight me, subtle flash of yellow wing. They stayed all winter, and now become a sudden, unstoppable disappearance. That summer's fragile sounds. I needed to hear words like whelk, words like paper nautilus. I needed to hear fragile sounds in my ear. I needed to hear survivor. I needed to hear pain. I needed to hear threshold. You couldn't convince me otherwise that things were working. Sometimes I needed to be shaken awake, the sweats and night terrors too violent. I needed to hear softness. I needed to hear green. I needed to hear the way you said, I love you, over and over again. I love you. I love you. I love you. I needed to hear the ocean. I needed to hear the wind in the tips of the trees, the way the silent owl flies. It was all too much that summer. The bees lost their hives, made new ones in the eaves of the house. I had to call an exterminator, and I didn't want to hear death. I didn't want to hear sadness. I wanted to hear creation. Honeycomb, hive, house, home. I love you. I love you. I love. Just gonna read 2 more. It's complicated, I tell my 10-year-old son when he asks if I believe in God. 1. I dreamed her awake. I dreamed her alive, no longer addicted. I dreamed her young and wild and free, or was it young and mothering me? Before the divorce, before her HIV, before her second husband died of AIDS. I heard enough stories even as a child, like that old song that spun on our turntable. I heard it through the grapevine. She often made me leave the room, the house, the yard. I'd later speculate needles. 2. The sky was black on Silly Mountain. The donkey brayed and his ribs hung out of his body like a ladder. Starved like we were that summer, we slept in our truck after they took me away, back to my dad, who didn't want me either, but at least he stayed in his own weird way. She never came back for me, never called, she never. Years later, I went back. I skipped school and found my way up the windy road to her small trailer. It was then I met my 2 half-brothers who replaced me, who were, as she said, angels, and by the grace of God, HIV-free. 3. Before and after that day, so many times I prayed I'd be forgiven for whatever egregious sin I must have committed in this life or a past one. I assumed I was being punished, so I punished myself and said over and over, not even a benevolent God could love me. Every time I passed a fountain, I aimed my coin for the center, as if the placement mattered, as if all that wishing could conjure wholeness, as if I really believed that nonsense. And anyhow, how do you parse truth and nonsense when you are told over and over you are loved by someone who simply can't love you, by a mother who was never there, by a God you pretend you cannot feel? This is my last poem. Thank you, everybody. Whiteout. The falling snow became a meditation, almost brought her to the ocean, sounded a lot like rain hitting something interesting. In the distance, she heard a freight train, no doubt taking coal somewhere to power something. The wind whipped her hair, blew in her face, and steam came from her mouth. And at that moment, the whole world was covered in a wet blanket. The whole world breathed the same cold air. And as the snow turned to ice, she retreated, went inside, and built a fire to burn all night, even though she was alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. So I'm going to ask, so we do have a little time. I'm going to ask if they are all amenable to it, if Katerina and Jennifer and Katherine would come back up. And while they're making their way to the stage and sitting in these lovely chairs in the back, I'm going to move these objects away and we'll have a short conversation to close out our evening. This is the awkward part where you could tell a joke if you want. You make me tell my Britney Spears joke.
I don't either. My husband's the joke teller.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. There we go. Right. So, I wasn't really going to ask this at all, but it had been on my mind, and there was some just really heavy content this evening, more so than usual, I would say. So I remember right after 9/11, story after story on places like NPR about like folks going to poetry for some sort of like solace, right? To the point now where it almost feels cliche to even ask about that. But that's been on my mind too in the wake of the school shooting yesterday. So I'm curious for you all who all of you in some way were dealing with just really intense, heavy topics in your poetry. What can poetry do, right? In the wake of such trauma, such horrors. Right? Poetry makes nothing happen. But what can poetry do? Even if it's just for you. Not asking you to answer for the whole universe, but what is poetry capable of in moments like this? And you started to grab the mic, so I'm going to hand it to you first.
I feel like poetry is capable of being a voice for everyone who can't write poetry. I think it really can explain things in a heartfelt way that maybe would help people experience something that they're not familiar with a little bit better. And it's short form, so also in a timely fashion.
That's an interesting question that you bring up, because my book was written a horrible event occurred that broke me, and I ended up in a psychiatric hospital. And that book was written while I was in the hospital, dealing with a lot of issues that I faced as a child, like all of this trauma. And it was because there were these girls that I couldn't save. And when I was dealing with that, the psychiatrist was saying, so it was like I felt like all the hard work that I put into becoming the person who could save children and then failed at it, that broke me. So I had to kind of face those situations, and so there's, I dealt with like gun violence and things that I faced in my childhood, and it kind of corresponded with what was going on in the world. And sharing this book with others, other Black women have told me, they were like, you have written experiences that we were afraid to talk about as Black women, for fear of being seen as weak or stereotypical. So I think that, as you say, it serves as a voice for those who have no voice.
Any thoughts, Catherine?
I guess I'll just add, I think when you see vulnerability in another person, if they're writing about something, I think that alone can be helpful for someone else.
This is a somewhat related question. I'm also thinking a lot about, because it came up actually at dinner when we got together before the reading, that I think you certainly not, because you've been doing lots of readings, right? But for these couple of folks, I think you said it was your first actual in-person reading you've been to since before the pandemic, which, and I do them once a month. I think we've done all live readings this year. We did all virtual readings. So I'm just kind of curious now how you think about how the reading, right, fits into just kind of the ecosystem of folks like you who read and consume poetry and connect with poets, and y'all who write it and hopefully have people read it. How do you imagine the reading fitting into just your writing life? How does it, and I'm gonna ask you to go first, because you are, have been on this whirlwind.
Yeah, I've been all over the country reading, and it's been a mix of people, but everyone, it's like they're coming out of holes. A lot of places, I was the first reading that had occurred in ages, and then some like you that just kept going no matter what, or people have going online, and interacting has been different. There was a different energy before the pandemic where there was this sort of facade of poetry and poets, where poets were, trying to put on their best selves when they go out, but now it's just kind of this honest, survival mentality of, we're just out here. We're not throwing on a ton of makeup, or just like putting on like our clogs or whatever it is people are wearing, those plastic shoes. It's just kind of, everyone's just their real honest self, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah. How's it been to be back?
It was good. I felt nervous. I mean, it's weird. I write really honest poetry though, and kind of really put myself out there. So sometimes I'm like, maybe I shouldn't. But overall, I was glad to read, and really glad to read with this group. And thank you. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, yay, St. Louis Poetry Center. Keep doing it, and everybody will start coming back out. I just think there's nothing like it as a poet to have people actually listening. There's this quality of listening that's unreal. It's not like just going to a party and talking to somebody. And it's just so wonderful, and thank you. And I think as a reader, I find as an audience member, I'm so grateful that it's happening, and yay, thank you.
Yeah, pleasure. So the last thing we're going to do is we're going to gather some paradise. So I've stolen this from Al Filreis, who does some podcasts through the Poets House, and I'm going to ask each of you to mention something, hopefully, preferably in the world of poetry or maybe literature writ large, that you have come across recently, even if it's not literature, somewhere in the realm of arts, a book you've discovered, a podcast that's really floating your boat, that you think you want other people to know about it. And I'll give you a couple seconds to kind of think about it while I say, I finally read Jennifer Egan, the novelist, who got a lot of acclaim for A Visit from the Goon Squad. The book after that is called The Candy House, and it is blowing my mind. The basic premise is it takes place in kind of present day or just barely into the future, a few years from now. When social media has evolved to the point where we are uploading our consciousnesses into a collective. So if you decide that you want to upload your consciousness too, you can view the memories of other human beings. But just the way she writes and gets into the heads of all of these different characters in these very authentic ways and in very different styles of writing is just mind-blowingly impressive to me. And it's just a very quick read, and I'm a very slow reader, so that's saying a lot. So, highly recommend The Candy House by Jennifer Egan. Who's next? Go for it.
So, during the pandemic, I found, there's still a pandemic, but during the really hard part, I found as a balm the novels of Louise Penny. They're sort of mysteries, and if you've never tried one, you might want to. There's sort of the awful things happening, and then there's this great connection between the characters. It's just a good combination, and I really enjoyed it. And the other thing I'm going to say, and people who know me well is going to think this is pretty funny, is I'm going to recommend a television show, and it's The Expanse. And it really reflects a lot of things that are going on. So if you're into science fiction, it's really great.
I feel really put on the spot. I'll just talk about what I'm currently reading. I'm reading a book called A Little Life, and I'm blanking on the author's name, I'm sorry, but it's a really heartbreakingly beautiful examination of humanness, and it's has such a beautiful character development, and I'm loving it. And I'm only on page 271 out of 860. This is the biggest book I've tackled in a long time. But I went into the bookstore and I said, what is the saddest book you can recommend? And that was what was recommended. And so far I have cried a couple times. It's meeting my needs.
So I've been sitting here and I'm like, oh no, I'll talk about this. So I don't know what to talk about. So I'll start with Audre Lorde. I know that everybody knows about Audre Lorde, but I read Sister Outsider, I don't know, about 2 years ago, and it just completely changed the way not only as I saw myself as a Black woman, but as a poet, and how poet is not only just a way to express myself, but it is a part of who I am and part of this history of being a Black woman. And I learned that from Audre Lorde. I will always love her for teaching me that lesson. And I'm reading Celestine right now, I think it's Our Open Hearts, and talking about what it means to be an Asian American when the U.S. is constantly on this anti-China sort of ban, and looking at that through a person of color's eyes, looking at another person of color's experience has been an experience for me. And lastly, I will mention Dorothy Roberts, and I can't remember the name of her book that I read, but It's a book about how the child welfare system takes children from Black families, and I highly recommend that book right now. So
Awesome. Thanks for all those recommendations. Aaron, I'm sure got all those. Hopefully we'll post some links at some point in the near future. So first of all, please help me appreciate these poets this evening. Really grateful to all of you. Our last reading of the year is on November 22nd. That is the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. So catch some poetry before you get into the thick of turkey and all that nonsense. Nonsense, not nonsense. It's good stuff, right? Thinking of my family. When our readers will be Marie Chu Elliott, Jet McDonald, and I don't even think I've talked to Aaron about this. We may have a third reader who was on and then off and maybe on again, Daniel Biggelson, maybe with us as well, confirming that with him. Just a reminder that you'll be able to view tonight's reading on Facebook, though we were having some technical issues with Facebook, so preferably on YouTube. After tonight. So a huge thank you to those checking out this video after October 25th. Again, thank you to all of our poets for sharing your work with us. Pretty please, if you're here in the focal point, go back and get some work from Katerina before you leave. You should see me or Aaron about becoming a member of the Poetry Center. You should maybe see Jennifer about subscribing to December Magazine. So support your local poets and poetry. Thanks to Erin for all of the heavy lifting she does every single week to make this thing happen. Couldn't do it without her, all of it behind the scenes. And thanks to all of you to choose to show up on this dreary, cold, drizzly evening and check out some poetry. And those of you on the internet, we're glad you're here too. Have a good evening. Take care of each other.